The cyber symposium put on by the purveyor of some of the worst expensive pillows you can buy online, Mike Lindell, is falling apart, and it's falling apart fast. I don't even know where to start. I guess the most substantive problem for Mike Lindell is that one of the cyber guys, his term, not mine, that he brought on that was supposed to help him prove that China had rigged the election against Donald Trump turned out not to actually believe that that was the case. So Mr. Lindell said that he had 37 terabytes of irrefutable evidence that hackers, who he said were backed by China, broke in, switched votes in favor of President Biden. He said that the proof is visible in intercepted network data or packet captures that were collected by hackers and could be unencrypted to reveal that a cyber attack occurred. But his cyber expert, Josh Merritt, who is on the team hired by him to interrogate the data, told the Washington Times that packet captures are unrecoverable in the data and that the data as provided cannot prove a cyber incursion by China. He was quoted as saying, so our team said, we're not going to say that this is legitimate if we don't have confidence in the information. And so, Ben, the most surprising thing to me is not that the data doesn't prove what Mike Lindell said, but that he hired an expert and the expert had the professional ethics that he wouldn't just lie about it. I thought any cyber guy he brought on would just tell him whatever he wants, but this guy actually cares. He wants to go where the evidence leads, and it doesn't lead to China overthrowing the election.
I mean, at a certain point, it's not even about ethics. It's just about getting a job anywhere else, right? Because could you imagine trying to get a job? You're like, oh, I did this analysis and it proved they're hacking, but anybody who looks at it would say, no, there's definitely not hacking here. So what are you talking about? You must be the absolute worst, cybersecurity guy in the history of the world. So nobody's ever gonna hire you for anything. I think the big shocking part to me is that they actually realized that Hugo Chavez isn't alive anymore, because originally they were like, it was Hugo Chavez rigging the election from Venezuela. And Hugo Chavez died in 2015, 2016 or something like that, And so that was I'm surprising to learn that they actually have changed their conspiracy theory now to at least seem more possible, despite obviously being ridiculous.
Yeah, things are developing fast and in a frantic way. So this was one of the most recent issues, the fact that Josh Merritt wouldn't back up his claims. It's not the first. The cyber symposium was originally delayed. He had been offering $5 million to any person who could disprove his claims, which presumably Josh Merritt can, I guess. So, but no, that offer is now no longer on the table. So Josh Merritt cannot have the $5 million, I guess. Originally, he had been displaying a video of scrolling incomprehensible text, which he claimed were the packet captures he had received. Proof he claimed that China was hacking the election. But apparently, according to a different cybersecurity expert, Lindell didn't have the actual data sets. The scrolling text was likely just meant to resemble what the packet captures might look like, and they were not the actual packet captures, which are unrecoverable. So he had presumably been lying about that. Shockingly, he wasn't being forthright with his audience. And so I don't know how much else needs to happen for his people to turn on him. How about this? A judge ruled against him in trying to dismiss a lawsuit today. And I don't know for sure what he was thinking when he found that out, but we believe we have it captured on video. Take a look at this.
Republican counties are being won by Trump, but by a much smaller number than projected. And then you have Philadelphia much closer and able to do its thing, because Rudy Giuliani will tell you Philadelphia is the kingpin of election fraud. But it wasn't possible without stuff like this.
Okay, so there in that video, you can see Mike Lindell rushing off stage around the same time the news broke of the judge. So either he was desperately trying to respond to his deteriorating legal situation, or the chimichanga hit. I don't know, but he had to get off that stage instantly. So Ben, there's a lot of issues here. Is this gonna do serious damage to this sort of area of the conspiracy theories? Rudy Giuliani has been sort of cast aside after looking like a buffoon. Is Mike Lindell having a Giuliani moment?
Yeah, I think the big thing is going to be Mike Lindell probably losing money in a lawsuit. Who knows how that will go? I'm going to go ahead and make a wild guess that hacker or that cybersecurity guy wanted that $5 million that Mike Lindell had promised, and that might be a new lawsuit that Mike Lindell has to worry about. And then, I mean, really, that moment really gave the same vibe as like a TV show where you've got the snake oil salesman that sees the sheriff approaching on the other side of the crowd and is like, "Oh, sorry, kids, I gotta go right now for some unrelated reason." Like, don't worry.
And like his whole shop just packs up into a briefcase for exactly those situations. Yeah, except it's just a pillow, so it's still kind of bulgy. Yeah, look, people should be able to see past this. In the pre-show, we were talking about the devolution thing. Have you heard about this? That no, like you thought that Trump was going to come back into office. No. He actually, before he left, he took the powers of the United States, he gave it to a new government that he is now the head of. And this is what some former QAnon people with big followings are now saying.
No, I get it. It's a really good origin story for the Sith Lords, right? The original Sith Lord had to find an apprentice, and then they pass it on, and it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh God. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.